guys, it's Tiffany from the Stoke fam, and today I am back with our fourth and final video in our homeschooling series, at least for now, but our intro to homeschooling series. And this one is all about frequently asked questions. So actually I have a list here and I'm just gonna go through the questions that I have actually gotten and received from you guys. If I think of others as I go through, I will pepper those in as well. But I'm gonna specifically go through the list of questions that I've gotten from you guys and answer those. So the first one I get or have gotten is, do you register with an umbrella school or with your county? And I briefly touched on this the other day, but depending on your situation, you have the choice for either. However, we have chosen not to use an umbrella school or a charter school. At this stage, it wasn't just the right choice for us, but there are definitely some perks to those, so I'll talk about those briefly. So with a charter school or an umbrella school, you often, not always, but often get like a stipend. So you actually get some financial benefit that you can use towards curriculum. You also get more assistance and more help. So if that's something that you really want, if you want somebody to kind of guide you and make sure that you're doing things the way that you want to, or if you're having trouble, that you have a resource, it may be a great option for you. The downsides with a charter school or umbrella school are that you are technically not a homeschooler, so you still are required to follow the requirements of that particular public charter or umbrella school. You technically are not allowed to just choose any curriculum. In fact, a lot of times if you have any religious material in your curriculum, you're not allowed to use it, even if it's not heavy. It has to be completely secular because it's technically part of the public school system. So if that's something that matters to you, you can obviously always supplement with whatever else you want, but they won't pay for or support that as part of your core curriculum. So you can always add Bible. They don't stop you from doing that. You can obviously do whatever you want in your own home, but if that's something that matters to you, it's just something to be aware of. The other thing to know with charter schools is sometimes they have attendance requirements where you have to check in at a certain time or so many days per week. And because of how we school, it just isn't the right fit for us. We typically do, like I said the other day, 4 days a week. But we also sometimes will school in summer or take field trips in the summer, or we may take the entire month of December off. And so we flex things around our schedule. And so for us, they typically haven't been the best choice. I've looked into them almost every year to reevaluate, but every time I've opted to stay in complete control. One of the other questions that I get a lot is, how do you decide on curriculum? And I think we talked about that a little bit the other day, and so that it would be a great video for you to go watch, is the one on choosing your curriculum specifically if you have that question, but I will briefly talk about some things here. And so basically the idea is to focus on a curriculum that has things that you will all enjoy. Otherwise, what's the point, right? If you all are dreading school every single day, it's not gonna be fun at all. So find something that works for your family. For us, though, here's a great example. For us, I really love the idea of a Charlotte Mason education. It's super beautiful, super amazing. Children are considered whole persons, and we're not supposed to water things down for them, and we teach them a wide variety or a feast of subjects like art and music, and it's beautiful. I love it. But when it came down to it, the rigorous amount of time that it took for me in prep work, and then the amount of time that it took for our kids was more than we were able to do at this stage of our life. That does not mean that it's a bad choice, and I think there's a lot of people who do it successfully and love it, but we consider ourselves more inspired now because it was just too much to do in that way. But basically the idea is to pick something that works for your family, and if it's not working, adapt, change. It's okay. It's okay to make those changes. The next question that I get a lot is, do you do all your subjects every day? And the short answer is no. The long answer is we typically do 4 to 5 days a week, and our core curriculum is generally done every day, as is math. But we also, like I mentioned a couple days ago, we do add in a few other things that we supplement that we think our kids need a little extra work in, or that they're interested in. And so those subjects, the electives, things like typing, extra language practice, those may be alternated, and we may only do them once a week or twice a week and not every single day. And that's okay. You don't have to. Even in traditional schools, most of the time science and history or something like that is alternated. So it's okay to do that. So find what works for your family. Our rule is generally that reading, writing, and math happen every day, and the rest of it, or every school day, and the rest of it I work into our schedule. The next thing that I get asked a lot is, how do you keep track and plan everything? And every year I make some minor tweaks, but in general I keep an attendance log, I keep samples of the kids' work, and I tend to keep a copy of our lesson plans. But when I say I keep a copy of our lesson plans, I mean in a very general form. I do not sit down and be like, we read page 12 through 17 in this book. I have done that in the past, but the last couple of years I have not been doing that. Basically, I feel in our state with our requirements, you should check your own, but I feel like in our state with our requirements, it is okay for me to have, here was our curriculum that we completed, this was the scope and sequence of that plan, because the programs we're using have that already, that we completed these assignments with some samples of work. I don't feel like I need to keep a daily log. If your kid is going straight back to public school next year and you know it, you may feel differently, but this is just what works for our family. And then the other thing that I find extremely helpful, because as I said, we don't necessarily school every day, but we do have to plan for a year to make sure that we get in the hours that we are supposed to. Technically in Oregon, it's not a strict hour requirement, but they suggest that it matches the public school requirement, which is roughly, I think it's 980 hours. So I tend to take that into account when I'm planning our year. So I actually use a planner to kind of map out our year, but I don't schedule it rigidly. I keep more of a routine and I kind of check things off as we go. But I do have a planner that I use. If I don't have a planner, I just can't seem to function. I use online versions as like for us to stay in touch, like because I need to know when my husband has call for work, and so that I don't schedule a conflict. So we use some of those online calendars that sync for those kind of items. But when I'm sitting down to do my yearly plan for homeschool and for our work, it really helps me, and our monthly goals and stuff, it really helps me to have a physical planner. And so I actually am recreating our physical planner this year, and it will be available, if it's not already by the time this video goes live, it will be ready and available for purchase. So stay tuned for that if you haven't already seen it. It's going to have everything you need to track. Even if you need more than I typically do, it's going to have everything that you need to track and stay on schedule. As far as our daily schedule goes, that's another question we get, is how do we schedule our days? We tend to go more with a routine than a strict schedule. So I tend to do more block scheduling or routines versus at 8:30 we start at the kitchen table or on the couch. I tend to have, when everybody wakes up, I kind of let my kids wake up when they wake up, which is typically between 7 and 8. And then they get breakfast and they have some morning chores that they have to do, and it gives me a little bit of time to wake up and do my routine. Because I'm not an early morning person, I'll be the first to admit. I'm trying to do better, but I'm not an early morning person. So we do not start our school typically till somewhere between 9 and 10. And after our typical routine, after the boys have done their breakfast and their chores, then they also on a school day tend to have a little bit of free time. That free time is they're not allowed to use electronics, but I do allow them to have some free play. So that means that they go and they may play Legos, or they may play a board game together, or they may go outside on their trampoline or go for a bike ride. And letting them have some of that freedom before we sit down to do school, I found has given me so much more buy-in. Getting started right after breakfast, we did that for a while, and it was hard for me to settle them down, but I feel like now that I give them that, like, even if it's like 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes is really all it is usually. But if I give them that freedom to kind of go do what they want to do, I tend to get much more cooperation when it's time to actually get down to business. The other question I get is, how long does it actually take you to do your homeschool? And each day varies a little bit, of course, depending on what the unit or section that we're working on is and how many rabbit holes we decide to go down. Because once we're in a unit, if we're talking about, say, I don't know, we did a unit on Asia last year, so say we were talking about pandas as part of that study. We might go watch videos about pandas and then look up the rainforest that they're a part of and then go down a research rabbit hole. So that might take us a little bit longer, but if we tend to keep it a little lighter and just go with the basics that are as part of our main curriculum, you don't always have to go that deep. Maximum 2 to 3 hours for all of our work. Our core work, I should say, our core work. So that means my gather round curriculum and their math. That is all done in 2 to 3 hours, including the time it takes us to do it together at the beginning of the day, and the time it takes them to do their workbooks, and then the time it takes them to do their math. That said, there are days where they will drag it out for what seems like the entire day, because everybody has their days, right? And so there are days where our kids will just, I don't know, it will just be one of those days where they decide that they don't want to write their assignment, and it will take forever. At this point in my homeschooling career and my life, I have decided that that is their choice. Once they have their assignment, they're old enough at this point. If you have a first grader, it may be a little more challenging, and I apologize. But at 3rd and 5th grade, they know their assignment for the most part. I help them obviously when they need my help. But if it is like you just need to do your copywork assignment, they know that they need to do that. And that has to be done before there are any other free time activities in the afternoon. And so they know that if they want to have any electronic time or free play with friends or anything like that, that it must be done. And so usually it doesn't happen, but it has happened. It does happen. It happens to everybody. And then I say that 2 to 3 hours is more than sufficient for your core stuff. That doesn't mean that they're not learning other than that, because then I have people ask, well, how do you reach that requirement for your state for hours or days or whatever, if I have to have more hours than that? So that doesn't mean that they're not learning other than that. It just means our core curriculum is done in that amount of time. But then they also have time where they will go read. They will do physical activities. I will have them do an art project a lot. They will do things like their Kiwi crates, their Mel Science kit, their electives that they do, that they've chosen to do virtually this year and last year. So it's a mix of things, but that doesn't mean that they're only doing 2 to 3 hours a day, but it means that at a max or at a minimum, we could get away with doing 2 to 3 hours. So if I have something to do, sometimes they may skip some of those electives in the afternoon. It's very flexible that way because it allows us to adjust. The other thing I have people say is, or wonder is, okay, but what about if I'm not getting all those hours, or I don't feel like I'm getting all those hours? I mentioned it the other day, I'm going to say it again. Think outside the box. So if your kid, if you have only done 2 hours in the morning, but you have to report 6 hours a day or 7 hours a day for your state, did their kids go outside and did they help you plant a garden? Because that can count. Did you prep dinner together? That's cooking. Did you go to the grocery store and did your kid help you with the menu plan and the shopping and the math while you were there? All of those things can count. So just get creative, because don't think in the boxes as much, because a lot of it is very fluid and our kids learn a lot from just being around us and participating in life. So just keep that in mind and think about what they might be learning from every activity that you do with them, and count it. I've also had people ask about loop scheduling versus a set schedule. So what that means is basically, do we have a set schedule like we always do our extra art assignment on Tuesday? Or do we always do our extra this assignment on Friday? And the answer is no, we don't. We tend to do more of that loop style. So basically, I don't preset out our schedule. I've done it in the past and I don't anymore. It makes me feel like I've failed if something happens. I'm too type A for that. If it's written down and I don't accomplish it, I feel like it just doesn't work well. So what works best for me is to say, okay, when we pick up on our next day of school, we're doing this lesson next. And if that next day happens tomorrow, or if that next day happens a week from now because we had a family emergency, then that's where we pick up. And then we have different things that will alternate in the afternoon. So it may be like our kids, for instance, last year, they actually had Beast Academy as their core curriculum for math, but we were also using reflex math, which we'll probably continue to use this year, or fluency, just to get them faster with multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. And so they would do a day of Beast, a day of reflex, a day of Beast, a day of reflex, not Monday, Wednesday, and Tuesday, Thursday. And so it would just rotate on that schedule. This year, because they're much more fluent in their facts from last year's work, we will probably do 2 days of Beast to 1 day of reflex, 2 days of Beast to 1 day of reflex, at least in the beginning of the year. And then we'll change things as needed. So a loop schedule makes me feel like we are still accomplishing things without feeling like I have failed. And they know what's coming. So it's not really a problem for them, because they know, okay, if I did Beast yesterday, then I do reflex this day. Or we did this unit in Gather Round this day, so we're going to do the next one tomorrow. It just is the natural progression of things without feeling so rigid. And that kind of brings me to the next thing of how do I schedule. I think I kind of mentioned all that, so I won't go into that one again. I kind of went off or added a little bit more earlier. But I will mention again that planner is coming out, and I do, because I know there are people out there who really, really like that dated, timed schedule. So the planner does have a block schedule option as well as a daily option with like hourly breakdown so that you can choose what works for you. So that's going to be available because I know there are people who really, really like that. And there are times in my life that it's been helpful, but right now for us, the block scheduling for school and everything just works better. And then a very, very common question that I get is, what do you do if a curriculum isn't working? And if you've listened to the rest of our videos, you have heard me say this: quit it. Stop. Get rid of it. Find something else. There are so many things out there that it's just not worth it. So if I have made the mistake, don't make it yourself, please. If you have something that isn't working and you hate it, your kids hate it, get rid of it. Sell it. I don't care if you throw it in the trash if you can afford it. Just get rid of it. Do something different. And if there's a curriculum, so even if you've been listening to me and you're like, oh, that Gather Round sounds amazing, I would love to try that out. She has a bundle for your whole year, and if you know it's gonna work, then do it. But if you're not sure, I would highly suggest that you purchase one unit. Try it. Does it fit? Is it working? Great, then buy the rest of them. But if it's not, then you know you haven't spent a huge amount of money and then feel like you can't do anything with it. Especially if you're buying something that's a digital download, because then it gets really dicey because you can't actually sell that, so then you're just stuck. If you buy a physical one, you can usually sell it, and there's a lot of secondhand homeschool resale groups, and a lot of times even ours will go on Craigslist. So. And then the last and not least is how do you keep track of grades to make sure your kids pass each grade. And I have a confession. I do not. I don't. I do not. There are a lot of homeschoolers who do actually grade their kids on every assignment and assign them an A through F score, just like we were used to growing up or in public school that your kids are used to. I don't do that, except math. Math I do grade because they need to know if they got their answers right or wrong, and they need to be able to work through those problems if they got them wrong, to know why they got them wrong so they can not miss them next time. So I do grade their math assignment, and now that we've switched to an online program, it mostly does it for me, so it's kind of a cheat, but regardless, I've always done their math, graded their math, because that is one thing that I feel like they really need to see if they've made a mistake, and then we need to work through it together. Now, the fact that I don't grade anything else does not mean that I don't check their work or that I don't expect a certain level of competence. It just means that I don't assign a grade. So for instance, if I give the boys an assignment to copy down a verse or a poem or something like that, and they copy it down and I can't read it and it's supposed to be their handwriting assignment, they get to go back to the drawing board and do it again because they need to actually do the assignment. And after they do it so many times, have to get sent back to do it again, they're gonna quit doing that because it's not fun. The flip side of that is, if I've given them an assignment to write a paragraph with proper punctuation and capitalization and sentence structure, and it's all over the place, and it's clear that they had no idea what they were supposed to do and didn't understand it, then giving them an F for me and for our kids was not necessarily the most effective way to actually get them to learn. What actually was better is for us to then go back to the drawing board and relearn those steps together and then let them try again. And it might be the next day that we actually try again, but we go back and say, okay, this is why, or these are the mistakes that we found. We would edit together, for instance, in that situation. We would edit together and then go back to the drawing board, relearn those concepts so that they can put them into practice the next time. And it allows then for us to really work on mastery before we move on versus just a grading scale. And so that is kind of how we work. Oh, I thought that was the last question. I actually have one more. And the last one was that, aren't you worried that your kids might not know everything that they need if you don't grade everything? And which kind of leads into the other one. And I used to, I really did. And so I have done it where I graded everything and did, you know, -3 out of 20 and gave them a percentage and a grade and a letter grade. I have done that. But over the last couple of years, I've changed my mindset on that. And here's why. Every single kid, in every single school is going to miss something at some point. So I'm not worried that they're not going to know everything they need to know if I don't grade everything, because if your kid is out for a week when you took them on vacation, or if they were sick, or if coronavirus or COVID messed up their entire end of their 8th grade year, if and their ninth grade year or their fourth and fifth grade year, there are always going to be instances that happen that interrupt learning. Whether it's a kid in class disrupting it or whatever, or one of the instances I just mentioned. There are going to be disruptions. There are going to be things that your kids miss. There's always going to be gaps. My goal is to minimize those gaps, of course, but there's always going to be some. So I'm not worried about giving them a grade and checking off each thing in that mindset. But my goal is to give them the framework of reading, writing, math, and a love of learning first and foremost, so that they know how to figure it out. So when they come up against something as they get older, or even now, that they know, hey, I want to learn how to do this, this is how I can find it out. And this is how I can then practice it to learn a new skill or concept. I would much rather that they understand that and have capability to read, write, and do math, and then to have that level of learning and understand how to research, than to memorize a bunch of facts that they may not remember later. So for me, that's my mindset, and I have to say, like, I totally get it if you're not there. I wasn't there a few years ago either, and honestly, I have to admit too that the thing that really reiterated to me that we were okay and it was going to be just fine was when my oldest had to actually take the state mandated testing a couple years ago. He was perfectly fine. He was perfectly fine. He was exactly where I expected him to be in every category. And so at this point, I'm like, okay, I know. I'm the one who's with him every day. I know where he's at. I know where they're at. I don't have to stress over that and put more on myself because of a letter grading system. So for what it's worth, everybody has their different theories, and there are a lot of people who would not agree with that, but it's just not worth the stress for me, and my kids are learning, and they're where they need to be, and that's what matters. The one other question I do get asked all the time is, what if we both have to work? And I don't have a perfect answer, but the answer I have is that we have done it. We have homeschooled all along, and we have both worked at different times. Currently, I'm working from home, so that definitely changes things, but we have both worked out of the home. And so the way that we made that work, I was working part-time. I will be fully transparent. I was not working 40 hours a week, but there were weeks that I worked 30 to 40 hours. So it just depended on the week. But what we did in that time was we did not have even our routine set as it was now. It was we school when we are available. So it might mean that sometimes we would school around the dinner table. And it might mean that sometimes we would school on the way driving somewhere on the weekend. It might mean that we would do school at breakfast. It might mean that we would do school broken up into 3 parts throughout the day. Like we might start it in the morning and then finish it in the evening. It might mean that John and I would trade off on the days that we were off. It might mean that we would beg grandma to do school one day for us. And it might mean that we would school on a Sunday. We would do what worked for our family at the time, depending on our schedule. And if your bare minimum only takes you 2 to 3 hours, which in the elementary years, it's probably plenty for the most part, especially until you're upper elementary, it's totally doable. It's not as easy as if one parent's able to be home. I totally get that, but it is doable. I hope that all of these videos have been helpful to you. If you still have questions after this, please reach out. We are happy to help. I know it can be daunting to navigate homeschooling as a new homeschooler, especially, and not to mention the fact that if you're brand new to this in 2020, it is a whole nother world out there right now. We're here to help, and I hope this video series has been insightful, or if not, a little bit interesting, even if you still are like, oh, this is not for me, I'm not a homeschooler. That's okay. I just hope you feel equipped to manage this year, even if only 2020 to 2021 is your only year that you're planning on homeschooling. I hope you feel more equipped after this series.